All right. Well, good afternoon and good evening to everyone. It is Saturday, October 27, 2012, and obviously I am not Chris. Yeah, I am. You know what? I'm just a little bit shy of the sex change I just had. So, all right, just kidding, Chris. Don't hurt me. This is Christie Aphrodite, and you may have heard me as a guest on his show a couple times. So I'm excited to be here. We're going to be talking about, or talking with Andrew Johnson of checktheevidence.co.uk. And, we're just going to kind of go with the flow. Andrew and I really haven't spoken with each other very much, but I know we're going to have fun. So anyways, Andrew, if you are there, welcome to the show. And how the heck are you doing tonight?
Oh, thanks for inviting me on. And I'm doing okay. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. I heard so many good things about you. And, obviously how you go about things in the, should we call it the conspiracy world or the truther world, or?
Well, yeah, I sort of tend to call it alternative knowledge. I think that's sort of less loaded, but it's difficult to give it a good name, I suppose. Yeah.
Ah, there you go. Okay, alternative knowledge. All right. And so you go about things a little bit differently. I've heard you kind of been pissing people off here and there.
Yeah, that does tend to happen, and I think it comes about as because you try and stick to certain principles. I suppose that's what I try and do, and some people are perhaps a bit less rigorous, and each person has a different style, obviously, and a different way of doing things, and I suppose I just have a different way to other people, and as we know, people get upset with other people. It's nothing new, so.
I've seen that once or twice. So,
well, yes.
Andrew, would you share with us a little bit about you and your path and how you got into this whole alternative knowledge business?
By all means, yeah. I really have been interested in topics which you don't really learn much about at school, and sometimes they're not spoken about very much because people feel they don't know enough, or they feel they're going to get ridiculed for speaking about them. So, I had a sighting of what I would call a UFO when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and that sort of made me interested in those sorts of things. And I always tried to follow up and work out what things were or weren't at that particular time. I knew I didn't see a star or a comet or anything like that. I knew enough at that age to determine that. But really, I suppose the biggest wake-up call for me came in 2003. I mentioned this many times in interviews when I do the introduction. Is I came across this thing called the Disclosure Project, and that was something that was UFO related. And without going into all the details, people can go and look at disclosureproject.org if they want to find out more about that. But what it basically was a number of UFO witnesses coming forwards and saying, they had these various experiences. But the difference was that these people were involved in quite high up government or military positions, or even some quite high up civilian positions. One particular person that comes to mind was John Callahan, who was the head of the FAA, and he was disclosing his inside knowledge about what was called the Japan Airlines incident in 1986, where Japan Airways plane was followed by a UFO for about an hour. And this was recorded on the ground, on radar, and in discussion between the pilots, and a lot of people saw this thing, But anyway, this Disclosure Project thing, why it kind of woke me up was because I discovered it in 2003, but it would this actual press conference, which was kind of like a big event for the Disclosure Project, that happened in 2001. And I thought, well, I've never heard anything about this. And this was a big event. It was the National Press Club, one of the prestigious venues. I thought, well, I've never heard anything about this. There must be a cover-up. So at that point, I knew there was a cover-up of the UFO issue. I knew that really was in place, and it was, being quite effective. So I started then at that point to explore that whole thing a bit more, and I found out a lot more about the Rendlesham incident, which was a landing of an object in the UK outside a military base in 1980. I started to find out a lot more about that. So I knew that more information was available on the internet, and I began to explore, much more, and I began to question the official story of 9/11, and that really drew me into a whole set of research, really, which I've ended up writing a book about. Here we are nearly 10 years after I started that part of the journey, and that 9/11 stuff is still, for me, is still ongoing. I'm still sort of writing new little chapters and episodes in that story, really, as I've come to experience it. And then I've looked into all kinds of areas, really. I've looked at pretty nuts and bolts stuff like the Apollo landings. I've looked at those. I've looked at the stuff about Mars that NASA have put out, and I've looked at aspects of consciousness and near-death experience. And all that I've tried to do is just try and kind of summarize what I found. And I've been asked to give presentations on these things, and that's been quite a good way, to actually try and make sense of this, and pass that understanding on to other people, I suppose. So that's essentially been my objective. And I think I've had some minor successes. I think overall, certainly for my own feelings on it. I feel I've achieved much of what I set out to do, in terms of delivering some information to people and getting them to think a bit more about what's going on around them.
That's kind of what it's all about, isn't it? I mean,
right,
there's so many groups, organizations, radio show hosts, etc., that this is the one truth, and it's essentially no different than mainstream, what everyone's complaining about. It's either, well, you have this lie to choose from or that lie to choose from, and if you step outside that line, you step outside that box, well, guess what? Our little, hitmen or groupies are going to follow you, and how dare you question anything other than what I had told you. So I love hearing your story, Andrew. You kind of started with UFOs, then 9/11, Apollo, Mars, near-death experiences and such. I would like to know more about your UFO experience, if you don't mind.
Oh, well, by all means, yeah. I mean, just to sort of give a bit of my background as well, I mentioned the UFO experience is not particularly significant as compared to other people's that I've listened to, but my own background is in nuts and bolts type stuff, because my background is in a type of engineering, software engineering, that is, which is essentially a very analytical process, it's writing computer programs basically, but you tend to get more involved in the design phase rather than just being given a particular program to write. You might have to sort of design the program first, or design the user interface or something, and so that's essentially my approach has transferred from that discipline over into what I do. That I try and analyze and break things down, and see what works, see what doesn't work, see what tallies with something else, see where the errors are. And this is what you do in a process of debugging. You have to determine where the errors are and then why the errors have occurred. So it's that type of approach that I have to all of this stuff.
Okay.
But weighed against that was my original background. But now I'm more involved in tuition and support of students. That's essentially the line of work that I'm involved in at the moment. And I've got quite a lot of latitude, because I essentially work. I work freelance, really, And so, there's nobody really to sort of tell me what hours I can work or can't work and stuff. So that gives me quite a lot of freedom in doing this other stuff. But going back to the UFO experience, I think I was 9 or 10 years old, the original one, and it's a very basic thing. I was just coming out of a youth club that I used to go to. I think it was probably on a Friday night, and it was probably about 10 o'clock at night, something like that, half past 9 maybe, and I looked up into the sky as I was coming down the steps, and I saw basically two star-like objects in the sky, but they were performing what I would call acrobatics around one another. I could see them sort of doing semi-spirals around one another, sort of curving around each other, and then they sort of flew off, and it only lasted maybe 10, 20, 30 seconds. And I was with another girl from the school I was at the time, and she saw it as well. And that was basically it. It was just like these points of light which were moving. I knew they couldn't be shooting stars or comets, or I knew they weren't, planes or anything like that, because they didn't move like planes. So that was the first sighting I had.
Did you tell your parents? I mean, what kind of reaction did you get, or did they see it too?
No, they weren't there, because I was at this youth club on my own, or just with a few friends, as I say, from the school, and it wasn't very far from where I lived. So, my mum might have picked me up after that. I honestly can't remember whether I told my parents. I probably didn't think it was significant enough at the time, because it was way off in the distance. Only like these points of light. It wasn't like a close-up sighting or anything.
Okay. All right. I'm just wondering, because most people, or especially children, and even adults, when we have experiences like that, everyone around you, your teachers or your parents or whatever, oh, honey, don't worry. It was, you're just hallucinating. You're imagining that. Here, why don't you take this nice little pill and you'll be right.
Absolutely.
You have to go through that then.
No, I never really had any fear of that. I think I didn't feel the need to tell anybody. I was quite neutral about it, I suppose.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was particularly significant.
Okay.
I've had 3 more sightings since that one.
Ah.
That one took place, as I say, that was when I was 9 years old. So that was probably around about 1974. Possibly 1975, and I might have been 10, but it was whilst I was still at junior school. Okay. And the next sighting I had was around about 1990, and that was sort of I still don't really know what that was. It actually looked like a kind of giant luminous insect, and it's a bit hard to describe. It sort of looked like a dragonfly.
Oh, wow.
But it was in the middle of the night. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and it was like an illuminated dragonfly with coloured segments.
Oh.
It was really quite odd, and I had no idea what that was. No idea at all.
Yeah, most of the things in the sky, obviously through the deductive reasoning, you could, realize, okay, it's not an airplane or a jet. It's not a helicopter. It's not a bird. But there's so much up there and out there. Basically anything unidentified is, a UFO. And,
right.
The thing is, just because it's unidentified, just because we don't know what it is, doesn't really particularly mean one thing or the other. It doesn't necessarily mean it's driven or, powered by aliens from another planet or another dimension.
Correct.
Or another universe. In fact, what are your thoughts on it? Do you think that most of them are coming from somewhere else, or are they internal, my lab's military?
Well, I think it's a combination of all of the things that people have suggested. Again, if you study the evidence for long enough, I think you can see indications of, for example, real physical spacecraft that are made out of metal. And they are operating on principles of advanced technology that we don't, well, certainly you and I are not given information about. Yeah. I think that the military knows a lot more, as you kind of alluded to. But then it goes way up the scale to, to ethereal beings who don't really have a physical body as such. They're more energy based. That appears to be what a number of witnesses have described. Yeah. Both seeing from a distance, seeing close up, and actually interacting with. They've described all of this whole scale.
Oh, I believe that. I believe,
right.
That I actually believe that we can do that. We humans,
I do as well, yes.
Can do that as well. So then therein lies the whole, if you are a full spectrum being and you have those capabilities, then why would you need a spacecraft? I mean, you can literally think yourself in another dimension almost instantly.
Right, and I mean, there's I think the stories of Sai Baba doing that, aren't there? Where he was able to think himself across into Washington D.C. and this was apparently all witnessed. I don't know the full story of that, but somebody was telling me a bit of this story.
Yeah,
and all these things. I think once you begin to follow the initial leads, you end up with a much more. Well, I have certainly ended up with what I hope is a much more open perspective to these types of things. For me personally, it's made me question exactly, what's going on in the world right now and what the bigger picture is actually, what in the bigger picture is relevant to what's happening here now, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why? Okay, Andrew, I just want to know. I mean, you sound like such a reasonable, practical guy and very genuine. I feel some nice heart and soul coming through. So why are people upset with what information you are finding and presenting?
Well, I mean, I think it's not, the UFO stuff doesn't tend to upset people that much because for the most part, except for, I mean, there are a number of people who have had very bizarre experiences, and they are upsetting, these abduction experiences and these women who've had apparently had fetuses removed from their bodies. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Kim Carlsberg, for example, I believe was involved with the Baywatch TV series for a period of time.
Oh.
I think she worked as a photographer on that series. She wasn't actually one of the. I think she might have had a few cameo roles or something in it, And she had these horrendous experiences where she was pregnant for a period of time and then not, and she recounts experiences with basically with aliens interacting with her, and she's not the only one. There are a number of these people, and hearing that people like Leah Haley, for example, she's another very credible witness. To some of these things that have happened to her, so those sorts of things can be quite uncomfortable to talk about. But the sort of what we call lits, lights in the sky, that's just a curious sort of mystery,
Yeah.
And I found certainly, in my own experiences, I don't mean my UFO experiences. I mean experiences of exploring the information. A lot of the UFO clubs, for example. All that they do is, somebody has an experience, they'll go and see the person, they'll write it down, they'll write down the date, they'll maybe write down the names of a few witnesses, and if they've got any photographs, they'll collect those perhaps, and then they'll just kind of file it away, and that's it. That's all the UFO organisations do.
Yeah, for the most part. Definitely.
For the most part.
Yeah.
Which has its use, but what I found was a really kind of a big push to me was when I found out about this chap called Wilbert Smith. And I don't know if you've ever heard of
I
Wilbert
have
Smith.
not. Tell us.
Well, Wilbert Smith is a very interesting character. Just I need 1 second to break. Just so.
Okay.
Right, that's done. Wilbert Smith is a very interesting character, and I think particularly for myself, I've identified with him because he was an engineer, and he was born in 1910, and he died when he was I think 52. So he was quite young when he died. He died in 1962, and he became the superintendent of radio regulations in Canada, and he became interested in the UFO phenomenon in around about in the late 40s, I think, 1949, 48, 49, that sort of time period. And of course, that was just after the famous Kenneth Arnold sighting, which is, people use that as a kind of place marker, which kicked off the modern phenomenon. But anyway, what was unusual about Wilbert Smith to me, was he really progressed in his studies of the phenomenon very quickly, actually. And he started off, as I've more or less described. He collected reports, he interviewed witnesses, he tried to establish patterns, and he did a master's in physics. So he was had a very sort of analytical, methodical approach to things, writing down all the numbers, working out various theories and so forth. And but what he ended up doing was he ended up speaking to people who said that they were in contact with aliens, basically. People he called them the boys' top side. Okay. That was his sort of kind of neutral name for them. And through these intermediaries, he was given information about how to build several items of technology, and one of them was a circuit which could extract energy from the Earth's magnetic field. And he designed and built this circuit and tested it, and indeed he was able to extract a small amount of energy from the Earth's magnetic field. It's not quite free energy, but it was something along those lines. Mm-hmm. And then the next, I think one of the next things that he designed was an experiment to affect the force of gravity, and he was able to build a machine. I don't know the exact nature of this machine, but it had a very high-speed rotating disc in it, which I think rotated at around 16,000 revolutions per minute. And using sensitive equipment, which he had access to, because he was working for the Department of Department of Transport, which the communications radio regulations came at that time under the Department of Transport in the 50s in Canada. And he was able to measure that this spinning disc caused an object to lose weight by 1%. They repeated this multiple times over, and he could see that this was true. So he knew that he created a very small anti-gravity effect with this experiment, and therefore it could be taken forward and developed from the place that he got it to. So he was already into energy, and he was already into anti-gravity, and we're talking really sort of early 50s. And he pretty quickly realised that there was no point in simply going around and cataloguing all these UFO reports, because he'd already established that there was something real here. He built these two devices. He built two other items as well. One was what he called a binding meter, which he was given instructions by this group, the boys' topside, as he called them, to make this thing. It's a very simple little thing. It was basically just it's actually like one of these luggage gauges, that you hang your luggage on to weigh your luggage. It sort of looked a bit like that, and it had a little clock face dial on it, and what it would do was measure the binding force at any given point. The aliens told him, or the boys' topside told him, that the way that materials held together wasn't just because of glue or because of bolting them together with putting them together with screws or nails or whatever. There was this binding force which pervaded everywhere on the Earth, and he was given instructions on how to build a device to measure this binding force, and he built this, and sure enough, he took this thing around with him, and this binding force, as measured by this unit, a very simple unit actually, changed, and he was able to tie this in with some of the air crashes that he'd sort of come into contact with through his work for the Department of Transport, and he was able to measure, for example, that one particular crash appeared to have happened in an area where the binding force was lower in that area, and this had caused part of the aircraft structure to basically fall apart spontaneously, or to weaken sufficiently, I should say, that the aircraft broke up. And this appeared to be tied in to what, according to what he was told, to the propulsion system that these craft were using. You see, wow. So that was another thing that he built, and then the third thing that he built was called a caduceus coil, and this was his area of specialty really, because he was a radio engineer. He built and he held 37 patents when he died. Did Wilbert Smith. For various items of radio equipment, and he built this coil. He was given instructions on how to wind the coil. When I say a coil, it's basically like a hollow tube, and then you wind copper wire around this tube. Many turns, 100 turns, 1,000 turns, whatever. But he was instructed to wind this coil in a particular way, and then tie off certain windings. I don't know the exact construction, but he was given fairly specific instructions. And then what he did was he connected this coil to his electrical equipment and his radio equipment, and using measurements, he could balance this coil or not, and check that the energy going into it was, coming out as radio waves or whatever. And so, in other words, the way that should work is you put in a certain amount of electricity into this coil, and a certain amount of radio waves should come out of it. That's basically, put it in simple terms. But he was able to show that if he made certain adjustments, he could put a kilowatt of energy into this coil, and he could get nothing coming out of it. This energy was going nowhere, and there was no explanation for that. And so he knew, and that's what the aliens told him would happen. They told him this was what would happen if he constructed it right that way, and they constructed it that way, and he was able to measure that. That's what happened. So, when you get into things like this, and somebody as competent as Wilbert Smith, he and what he was getting into, there's something real going on here.
Yeah. Something
very important.
Sounds a little more effective than just documenting stories and, posting them on a website.
Right. I mean, he essentially became disillusioned because, for example, the anti-gravity experiment that I told you about, if you read the full story of that, what he ended up doing was he was asked to present this experiment at some kind of science fair. But the way he was asked to present it, I can't remember the exact details without going and rereading the account. And this actually, incidentally, all comes from the research of. It's not my research. This has come from a couple of other people called Grant Cameron, who runs presidentialufo.com, which is a very, very, very interesting website. And Nick Belascus was involved with this research. These are both Canadians, these guys. And so, they uncovered a lot of this material, some of which was classified for a period of time, and then some of it was declassified in the 1970s. And the story of this anti-gravity experiment was basically he was asked to present it a certain way. He wasn't happy with that, and they pressured him to sort of put it in a certain sort of context as they want to present it. He wasn't happy with that, and eventually he just said, "The world is not ready for this," and he packed it all away, and had nothing to do with it ever again.
Wow.
Because he
I
realized
somebody kind of, convinced him, you're getting too close to the truth here. You need to walk away, or we'll, make you go away.
That's possibly the case. I don't think he was threatened. There's no words about that in his accounts, but he did know. He did get to understand that there were groups, secret groups, that knew more about it than he did, and he had dealings with them. And he, for example, was bits of crashed saucers, and he had to analyse these with a team of people. He also said on his deathbed to his son that he'd seen alien bodies in the United States when he'd been on a visit there. So he actually said that to his son on when he was dying, because he died of cancer of the lower bowel. So okay. I mean, Why would you make up a story like that? You know? I mean,
No, I don't think he is. It doesn't sound like it at all. And, in my limited personal experience, my grandfather was actually in that arena around the same time you're speaking of. He's actually cited in books like Isaac Asimov and Heinlein and, I can't remember the rest, but, was out there and involved in Army intelligence. So, the thing is, though, they get messed up for life, and something happens and they can't talk about it or won't talk about it just because it totally changes their paradigm. Or General Levkin, I was blessed to know him before he passed a couple years ago. And let me tell you, I'm sure
I know his story. I know some of his story.
Okay, so we know for a fact, he was definitely threatened repeatedly, and he would write and try to share what he could, but what he knew was so mind-blowing that it was difficult for him to even talk about it in his own house. He was scared to death. It totally changed his paradigm because, he was kind of like a good Christian guy and, just thought that, God was a bearded dude in the sky, and that's all there was. It was only us. We're the most intelligent life in the entire universe. So, whether it's by traumatic instances, being in these bases and seeing these beings and having your world thrown upside down, or, the forcefully, you better not talk about this or you're going to go away thing. I've seen that happen so many times. So, I don't know. I would tend to think that there was definitely something going on, just,
I don't doubt it at all. Again, what I've tried to do is kind of at least prove to myself, that this is what has happened. And again, listening to Stephen Lufkin was very much part of that waking up process for me.
Yeah, he's such a beautiful person too. I don't know if you've had a chance to meet him, but
I've never met him.
He was definitely not making it up. I got to eat dinner in his home. It was amazing, and he, because he was a descendant of, General Levkin in the Revolutionary War and all of that. And if you didn't know that, he actually, the table that they signed the Declaration of Independence on was in his home. We sat at that.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, North Carolina. But, these people definitely aren't making this stuff up. But now, so let me ask you this. What does it mean? Let's say, all of this is true, which I happen to believe it is, but, regardless. Let's say it all is, and, there's all these groups, UFO disclosure. Okay, great. Wonderful thing. We know they're there. We've seen them. I've photographed them. I even have one on video, which was totally wild. So we know they're there. But what is, let's say, Andrew Bashago talks. He was actually on my show like 3 or 4 years ago, and he's like, well, I know definitively Obama is going to announce, UFOs by the end of, I think it was 2009, he said, which of course didn't happen. But my question is, let's say they do. Let's say all the world leaders, the UN, or even just the president of the U.S., whoever, says, you know what, UFOs and aliens are here. What does that mean? What does that do to humanity? How is that going to change our lives?
Well, I don't think it's going to work like that, because my conclusion really, to cut to that, is that the aliens are already here, and they've been here for a long time.
Maybe you and I are some of them.
Well, I think that's part of the story. They're involved in the power structures. And that's not to say that I think, people listening to this might want to misquote me and say, oh, Andrew Johnson thinks, little green men are running the planet, or reptilian beings are running the planet.
They look just like us.
I think some of them just like us, just look like us, as you say. And it appears to be not entirely, a physical thing. There is a non-physical aspect to this. And that non-physical aspect is often overlooked.
Yes.
And I almost think of it like, you do get down almost to this idea of forces of good and evil, forces of light and darkness. And it seems from what I've heard and listened to and read that applies to, to be blunt, that applies to the aliens just the same as it does to us. There seem to be good guys and bad guys, in the alien sphere as in the human sphere.
Definitely. It's so good to hear you say that, because I was going to ask you your views on that. Because, we have, have you heard of Daryl Sims, the alien?
Yes,
okay.
I have heard of him.
And he's just definitively, without a doubt, they're all bad. And then there's other researchers that, they're all demons. And, then there's some, in the Love and Light type, groups that are, they're all good. They're all here to help. And it's, think about it like logically.
Yes.
Let's say a green dude or whatever, a gray dude, landed on Earth for the first time. And, he ran into you, Andrew, and said, okay, so what are these humans? Are they good or are they bad? Both.
Mm.
Yeah. So, it's just, putting, broad brushing everything, and putting it into a box and, they're all good, or, they're all bad, or, they're all, shape-shifting reptilians and they're here to get you and suck your blood. Well, guess what? They've been here probably, maybe longer than us. I don't know. I would never go into a debate and saying who came first or whatever. I wasn't there. But if that was true, we certainly would be seeing a lot of destruction. Obviously, they have the technology if they can go from planet to planet or universe to universe.
Oh, yeah.
So, it's nice to hear you speak with a clear and open mind and realize that, yep, they're probably already here, and obviously some are good, some are bad, and you're not trying to put it in a box.
Right. I was very... taken with what Wilbert Smith ended up saying, because kind of after he was a bit like me in terms of, after he'd done all this research, he kind of summarized it all in about a 20-minute speech that he did, and I think it was made in 1958. And I've put this on my website, and I think it's on Grant Cameron's website as well. But if you listen to this 18-minute speech, it's like, it's just absolutely fantastic.
So this is on your website, Andrew?
Yeah, well, I've put it in a presentation. I've put it on YouTube as well.
Okay, where do we find that?
Well, if you Google, it doesn't have to be on my website, but let me just try this. I'm going to try and Google Wilbert Smith, 1958, Ottawa.
Let's post this in the text chat for those of us.
Let's just see what comes up.
Yeah.
Ottawa address.
And
looking
for that, his website is checktheevidence.co.uk.
Right. So this works better. If you Google Wilbert Smith, 1958 Ottawa speech, you will get some links to that. And it's just 18 minutes long. It's like the best thing ever I've heard just about. It's just fantastic. And what he says in that speech is the human race in the form of man, it's slightly sort of sexist terminology because it's from 1958, but he says the human race in the form of man is spread throughout the universe and is incredibly ancient.
Definitely.
And I thought, yes, that when he said that, I just knew it was true, because of the way that he'd approached it and all the other things that he'd explained up to that point, and it just resonated so strongly with me that I knew that was true.
Absolutely.
And again, he points out a number of other things in this speech that are really worth sort of thinking about. And that on the Earth, he says, for example, there have been many civilizations which have been and gone. And it's been colonized over and over again. And that, again, if you look at things like Michael Cremo's research, and you look at Graham Hancock's books, that all seems to fit in with that larger picture of what seems to have happened.
Yeah.
And I suppose for me personally, when I think about that, and that's the truth as I understand it, everything else that's going on right now becomes less kind of significant, because I keep thinking, I think this must have happened before. This must have happened before somewhere either here or somewhere not too far from here. There are people in the universe who have been through all this before, this sort of thing. It's the same sort of things. And that's why I think we often identify with these themes that come up, in movies and books. There's certain themes that come up that you think, oh yeah, I understand that.
I think we know innately it's all real. I mean, yeah. Okay, and plus, a lot of these fiction books, obviously they have to label it fiction to sell them, but I believe that they either experienced it themselves or they're channeling something from the past. And then there's many people like Dr. Larry Babcock and others who believe like Star Trek and Star Wars is pretty much just history. And he's done so much research and brought it together and he'll swear to you that all of even like the planet names and everything they use in those series and movies are actually what they really are.
Well, I mean, again, who knows? It certainly sometimes has that feel to it. But one of the experiences that I like to mention is that of Travis Walton. I don't know if you're familiar with Travis Walton's experience.
I'm not. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, why I like to talk about that is I think it illustrates a number of things. One of which is that certain elements of the control group that's currently seems running most of the physical events on planet Earth, if I can put it like that. I think there's elements of Travis Walton's case which they don't really like people knowing about or thinking about. And I'll explain the story and then tell you the reason.
Okay.
Travis Walton was what we would call in this country a lumberjack. He was a woodsman. He chopped down trees.
All right.
And he quite a tall guy, over 6 foot. Well built, and very well read, very intelligent. But a bit of a loose cannon actually. Or he was in his 20s. He's sort of settled down a bit now. And he was working on a forestry contract in Snowflake, Arizona, 1975. I believe it was November the 5th, 1975. It was at the end of the day. It's getting sort of fairly dark. I think around sort of 6:30 in the evening, and they're packing up. They get in the truck. They're driving down the mountain to go back to the road to go back home, and they see the forest lit up, and they think, oh, the forest fire somehow started. But then, as they're driving down the road, they see flying saucer, and it's at close range, and sort of like 100 yards away, something like, probably less than that. And so Travis, he jumps out of the truck. So they slowed down to sort of take a look at this thing. He jumps out of the truck and he runs towards it. And the other 5 guys in the car are going, Travis, what are you doing? What are you doing? They're absolutely mad. And he then sort of crouches down behind this pile of wood, and he sort of bobs up to look at this thing a bit more, and then he feels this energy like an electric charge, and then this beam apparently comes out, hits him, and he flies about 10 feet across the 10 feet in the air, and he lands on the floor, on the ground, and the guys in the truck are thinking, this flying saucer's killed Travis, and they just drive off, and they're going absolutely, and you see one of your friends has been killed by a flying saucer. What are you going to think about that, kind of thing. But anyway, they drive a bit further down this sort of track, and they basically then, Mike Rogers, who's Travis's sort of is actually been Travis's brother-in-law. But he sort of stops the truck and he thinks, we can't just leave Travis there, for dead. That's just a horrible thing to do to a friend. So I think he says to the guys, look, you can stay here if you want, but I'm going back for Travis. So if you want to stay here, get out of the truck. I'm going back for Travis. And I think they then say, well, we'll all go back. So they drive back up, and guess what? Travis isn't there. They get back and he's gone. So they don't really know what happened. And they go down. They eventually sort of have a bit of a debate. They drive down the mountain, and of course they decide to go and report the incident to the police because they really don't know what's happened to Travis because he's not there. And so the sheriff interviews them, and they agree that they're going to tell him the truth of what happened. They're going to tell him the truth that they saw a flying saucer. Travis was hit by this beam, and then he's no longer there. They decide they're not going to cover it up. So anyway, what basically happens is they send out a searching party that night, and then they don't find anything. They go back the next day, daylight, with dogs and more people. Don't find anything. No sign of Travis. He hasn't sort of stumbled down the mountain in the night or anything. And so then they take lie detector tests because the sheriff is quite concerned, about the story, and the people won't believe it. And so they basically they then take these polygraph tests, and they all pass. One guy refuses to take the polygraph test at that time, and they take the polygraph tests, and they all pass. But the people in the village are becoming a bit suspicious, and they think that the 5 guys have killed Travis so that they can keep all the money or keep more of the money from the logging contract that we started working to. But then, after 5 days, Travis I think it's either it must be his wife, I think he's married by then. His wife gets this phone call, in the middle of the night, and it says, "Oh, hey, it's Travis." And there's been quite a lot of publicity about the case at this point, because word gets out that these guys have seen a flying saucer and one guy's missing. And so they have all the press are there, and they're following this like hawks, as you'd expect. The word has got out. And so his wife thinks it's a prank call. And she puts the phone down, rings again. It's Travis. Can you come and get me? And this time they take him seriously, and they go and drive out and get him. And I think he's about 12 miles away. And he's a bit traumatized, and he talks about seeing these things with huge eyes looking at him, and then it comes up in conversation that Travis, feels like he's been gone for 3 or 4 hours, but he touches his face and he's got quite a few days of beard growth, and actually they tell him he's been gone for 5 days. So he thinks 5 days. What happened? And basically, what he ends up telling, once he's settled himself down a bit, he has a urine sample taken, his clothes are taken, clothes that he was taken for testing and so on. Mm-hmm. And they do actually bag them up. They have the presence of mind to do that. So he then recounts this story of seeing these aliens looking at him. He's laying on the table. He then gets very frightened and tries to lash out at these aliens with a glass tube that he finds on the shelf, mm-hmm. where he is. They walk out of the room. He then walks out in the opposite direction, and he walks into another room, and he goes up to a chair. And as he goes up to this chair, the sort of walls in this room sort of fade away, and he can see a star field. He sits in the chair, and he presses some controls on the arm of this chair, and the star field changes. And then a few minutes later, this more human-looking alien comes in. Or he thinks it's a human, and Travis thinks this guy's come to rescue him. But he doesn't say a word. He's got a clear sort of helmet on, and he tries to talk to him. But then this other human-looking alien leads him down a ramp into another area, and a female-looking one comes up to him as well, puts a mask on his face. And then he wakes up on the road, looking up, and he sees a little portal of light, and then he sees this object fly off, and that's all he can recall. And he later is hypnotized to recount his experience, because he's found it very, very traumatic, particularly these aliens with the huge eyes. But he describes they're wearing red suits and stuff. And he describes this thing in quite significant detail, but when he's hypnotized, he doesn't recall anything extra. So the reason for me going into that level of detail is that this was all documented in the police record. The sheriff investigated it, and then they had it was the county sheriff, and then they had the state official came to investigate. He thought they might have a murder case on their hands. He came to investigate. And then obviously Travis came back, so all the he wasn't dead, so they had to drop all the charges. But eventually, what happened was they decided to make a movie about his story. Travis was approached a number of times by Hollywood producers because they wanted to make his story into a movie. And eventually, in 1993, the movie was released. And it was called A Fire in the Sky, and it featured Robert Patrick, who was the Terminator in the second Terminator film. If people watched that, so it was had quite a big Hollywood star in the film, and D.B. Sweeney played the role of Travis.
Mm-hmm.
And Travis Walton said that they made a good job of the film. And they told the story of what happened to his buddies, being accused of his murder and so on, or being suspected of his murder, and what they went through while Travis was gone. But the thing that they completely messed up was the abduction sequence, where Travis was aboard this spacecraft.
Yeah.
Because what they portrayed in the film was that Travis was laid on this table. He had this rubber membrane put over his whole body. He was naked. The aliens put this membrane over his whole body, and he was like suffocating because it went over his mouth and his head and his nostrils. And then they poked these little holes in the membrane so that he could breathe. They stuck things just underneath his eye, and they stuck things in his body. And if you watch this abduction sequence in the film, it's extremely visceral. It's very scary. Really quite unpleasant.
Yeah. Of course, you gotta scare people, right?
Right. But the rest of the film was, quite faithful to actually what happened to him. Why would the Hollywood producers change this abduction sequence to complete the opposite thing? Why didn't they have a sequence where he's standing talking to the aliens and saying, how does this ship work, and can we go to Mars or something, even if that didn't really happen?
Yeah.
Why did they have to change it into this horrible sequence, which
fear and
right.
people away, traumatize them, get them to associate anything they don't understand with torture and pain, and it works, doesn't it?
It does work.
Look at all the alien movies and such out there, aliens and cowboys, and I don't even I really don't keep up with Hollywood, but the ones that I've got glimpses of, it's always in a negative light.
Yeah, pretty much. I wouldn't say that's exclusively the case, because there have been some good alien movies.
Okay.
Predominantly they are sort of portrayed as evil.
Yeah.
But there are a few. Like for example, Paul, that was on a couple of years ago. And if you haven't seen the film, it's just called Paul. It's literally a man's name, Paul, P-A-U-L.
Paul, P-A-U-L. Okay.
Yeah. And that was done by Simon Pegg and I always forget the name of the other guy. And it's got Sigourney Weaver in it as well. She's in it, and it's a wonderful film. It's a wonderful film. It's very, very funny. There's quite a lot of bad language in it, so if people are offended by that, they might want to steer clear of it. But it actually touches on. I mentioned this in a couple of the presentations I've given because it's so good. They touch on things like healing, expanded consciousness. They actually, there's a sequence where one of the characters admits that everything she's ever been told is a lie.
Oh, wonderful!
And that's actually one of the lines in the film. And the Paul alien, he's really laid back, and he's funny, and he heals people, and it is a wonderful film.
Is that something that we'd have to go to like a video store to rent? Could we find it on Netflix or YouTube?
Yeah, it should be on Netflix because it was we got a DVD of it, and my children wanted to see it.
All right.
And it's suitable for teenagers basically. If your children are younger than teenagers, then some of the bad language is perhaps a bit excessive. But if the teenagers are older, they'll really enjoy it because it's funny. Even if you don't want to think about it from the perspective that I've sort of been talking about, it's actually very funny as well, just as a comedy. And I think the people that made it did do quite a bit of research, and they did. There's a sequence that they shoot at the famous Area 51 mailbox as well, and they go to the little ale inn, the little ale inn sort of thing as well, and that's a sequence there. So, but the point really was that the abduction sequence in the Travis Walton film is very, very similar to many of the others that people have described, where they do appear to have had implants put in them,
yes.
And things stuck in their bodies. But Travis Walton didn't recount that story. So what was particularly interesting to me was why they changed Travis's experience, not to be just some generic horrific experience, but an experience which was very similar to the ones that other people described. It's like they wanted people to think that Travis Walton's experience in terms of what happened with the aliens was the same as, for example, the ones that Bud Hopkins had investigated. He's written several books about the sorts of invasive experiences that people have described. So that, I think, gives us a clue into some of the workings of what can be, I call it two things. One is the cover-up, and the other is its perception management. You need to manage people's perceptions of this issue in some way, and that's done directly. It's not just done. Some people would argue, oh, well, that, Andrew, what you're saying there is probably not necessarily true, because they're just doing that to, make it a horrific experience and traumatize people. Yeah. I think that is true, yes, but they're doing it in a more specific way than that, because they could have just changed it into some experience where these aliens try and eat him or something, but they didn't do that. They specifically had things stuck in him and this sort of thing.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing all that with us, Andrew. I think we are coming up against a break here real soon, and we're going to have to reset the call because we're going to open up the caller lines to everyone. So when you and I both get hung up on, just hang on. Matt will get us right back. And if you do have something to share with us, want to talk to Andrew, have any questions or comments, please feel free to give us a call at 347-688-2902. That's 347-688-2902. And I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm seeing here that you can also accept Skype calls. And it looks like the Skype name is Freedom Screen, FreedomScreen. But I hear the music, so hang on, everyone. We are going to be right back with...
welcome back, folks. We're trying to get this set up so we can take calls. You'll have to pull him again.
All right, here we go. Okay, do you see your name there on the screen?
No, he's not showing from me. I've sent him an ad request. If you could just drag his name back in here, I should be able to add him again.
Yeah, I'm seeing it. I added it, but since you started the call, you're going to have to push the button. You don't see it there, though.
No, it's not showing for me. I just sent him another ad request.
Fine call. Okay, we're going to get this worked out. That was a kind of a short intro, so I apologize for the unprofessionalism. This is Christie Aphrodite of SoulJourneysRadio.com, and I am filling in for Chris Vortex of Dream Vortex Radio this afternoon or evening, depending on where you are listening from. Our special guest tonight is Andrew Johnson of Check the Evidence. That's checktheevidence.co.uk, and we're talking about all sorts of interesting information.
He's back with you now.
All right, excellent. So I know Ahmad just set up the caller line, so if anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to call in. It looks like we've got everything working. So the phone number, I lost it. Here it is. It's 347-688-2902. That is 347-688-2902. 2902, and I believe you could also call in from Skype by adding Freedom Screen on Skype. That's Freedom Screen. Okay, now Andrew, I love everything you've been sharing with us. Definitely extremely informative, jam-packed with information, and I'm just still not getting it. Why do people get offended by your work?
Oh, well, I think we haven't really talked about the area of research that people get most offended by.
All right. Well, help us out here.
Yeah, I mean, all this stuff is, I think, I suppose there's a kind of link here in terms of one of the other reasons why I found the Travis Walton case so very interesting is that actually quite a lot of people in the UFO community got very upset about Travis Walton's case. And Travis Walton has written a very interesting book. And in fact, he wrote the book years ago. He's recently reissued it with I think he's added about 40 pages. And what really interested me with Travis's case, not just what I've told you, but also the reaction in the UFO community to his case. That's also interested me very strongly. Okay. Because, for example, just take yourself, for example. You've obviously had an interest in the UFO issue from what you've told me in, the conversation we've had and so on. And I think it's really cool that you Stephen Lufkin and met him, and that's brilliant. Mm-hmm. But you hadn't heard of Travis Walton. But perhaps you would think, correct me if I'm wrong, but that what happened to Travis and the way it was recorded was highly significant. And you would think that anybody with a passing interest in the field would have heard of Travis Walton's case. Yeah. Now, it is fairly well known. I'm not saying that nobody's heard of it, but it's not one which people seem to... It's one of the first ones I like to talk about because there are so many. It's so well documented. It's one of the first civilian cases.
Why do you feel that his story has been suppressed within the UFO community?
I think one of the reasons is that it actually leads you to a state of knowledge, not belief. It has that tendency.
Right? That's scary.
Right. So my take on things is about gaining knowledge, not changing my belief. It's an entirely different thing. Okay, and I think when you are putting forward something which becomes knowledge, in other words, you can't really disprove it, you can't say, well, it's just a theory, that's when it becomes dangerous, because you really start to change the way people think. You force them to change the way that they think, or they have to deny reality.
Yes.
And I've seen the way that Travis's case has been treated. For example, if you read his book, I think about 2/3 of the book is dealing with debunkers, and 1/3 of his book is dealing with his actual story. And I've seen this pattern involved with the 9/11 research that I've been involved with, and it's exactly the same pattern. Now, you can have all these groups or all these websites talking about conspiracy theories and 9/11 theories and, was the control center of operations in Building 7, did they somehow set off all the explosions from Building 7, this semi-secret bunker that was reinforced in 2000 and blah, blah. You can go into all of that. Oh, was Cheney giving a shoot-down order to the plane? Those are all theories and beliefs, okay? You can't really prove it, certainly not with the information that we've got at the moment. However, what people have got upset with me for is because I have been encouraging people to gain knowledge about what happened on 9/11, not belief. Okay?
Okay.
And that knowledge comes from the research of Dr. Judy Wood, who I've been trying to kind of... two things, really. I've been a bit of a sounding board for some of the stuff that she's compiled. It's a sort of relatively minor role. We just ended up coming into contact, and we obviously developed a friendship. And, in this sort of field, as you know, there are people who you think you can trust.
Yes.
And you find out sometime later that actually you can't. And what I've done is, for example, we can, again, form a link here. You mentioned Andrew Basiago, for example, earlier on, talking about the trips to Mars. And I don't think you mentioned the trip to Mars, but I know he has spoken about that in he was in this jump room and so forth. Is that story true? I don't know. It may be true. It may not be true. But at the point, it's one of these stories that we have to put in the classification of belief. You can believe it's true, or you can believe it is untrue, and it doesn't really affect anything one way or the other particularly.
Yeah.
A person called Alfred Weber has promoted that story several times. Now, I was very interested in Alfred Weber's work a few years ago. He'd written this book called Exopolitics and Law in the Universe, and it seemed like I didn't actually read the book, but I heard him talking about it, and it seemed quite interesting. He seemed a very knowledgeable chap. He was touching on some of the ideas, for example, that I started to talk about with Wilbert Smith, and this idea that we've got this great sort of human culture spread throughout the universe. Alfred Weber talked about some of those sorts of ideas, at least to some extent, so I became very interested in that. Mm-hmm. However, he then started to talk about 9/11, and he also lived in Vancouver, which was the same, it was actually 12 miles away from another person that I came into contact with, and that was John Hutchison. And he became very relevant to what happened on 9/11. He became very relevant to what happened on 9/11 in 2007. He also became very relevant to this idea of moving from belief to knowledge about what happened to the World Trade Center on 9/11.
Yeah.
And without going into all those details, which I've documented at length on my website, and to try and establish the reason why I've gone into this, Alfred Weber later became very upset with me, because what I actually did was I pointed out that he'd done an interview with John Hutchison and Dr. Judy Wood, mm-hmm. regarding their respective areas of research which crossed over. Again, if you look at what Dr. Judy Wood uncovered over a period of about, probably 4 or 5 years, she looked at 10,000, probably over 10,000 pictures of the destruction of the World Trade Center, and she was able to catalogue various phenomena. Mm-hmm. In late 2007, she realized that many of these same phenomena had appeared in the experiments that John Hutchison had done. With that in mind, Alfred Weber, in 2008, in February, I think it was February the 14th, if I remember the date correctly, hosted at his house an interview with John Hutchison and Dr. Judy Wood, in which they go into some of the details which I just mentioned briefly, and this was recorded, and it was actually rather badly recorded, I have to add, and he posted this audio on his website, thankfully, and I was able to download it, and I cleaned up the audio a little bit with some of the software that you can download, which I fiddled around with, and I sent him it back. So I thought, fantastic. Alfred Weber is interviewing Dr. Judy Wood, he's interviewed John Hutchison, he's talking about 9/11 and the technology that was involved in the destruction of the World Trade Center, which I'm pretty sure is hooked in somehow into this UFO question, because some of the same names recur, one of which is John Alexander, but I won't go into that at this point.
Yeah. You mean Colonel Alexander? Or?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, Colonel John Alexander.
I just got to say this. About the jump rooms and the Mars thing, I do believe that there is truth to a lot of it. But do I personally believe Andrew's story? I don't. And,
right.
As I mentioned before, I've had him on the show and I've questioned him. I have a lot more questions, and he will come back. So, while we're at it, because you know how the disinformation runs rampant, and all of these people seem to appear just out of nowhere, all at the same time with this big story. And okay, yeah, all right, let's say there's a face on Mars. Guess what? Big deal. What does that have to do with what's going on right here, right now. And, I could spend a lot of other time, talking about that. But see, what I find hard to believe is, first of all, every time you hear him speak, it doesn't matter what show or what it is, it's always the exact same story. It's like a recorder, like it was either programmed or he's reading a script, number one. Number two, I grew up, I shared with you a little bit in the first hour about my grandpa, who was, an Army general, and, there's some other things about, I've been very close to and involved forcefully into Black Ops projects.
We just lost him.
Okay, how do we get him back?
He can join back up soon. I'm not sure what happened because I don't have him on my friends list.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe
Is he still showing on your Skype?
Yeah, he is. So maybe something just cut out for a minute. Here he is.
There he is.
All right.
Oh, he's still gone.
Okay.
There he's back now.
Okay, so I'll just continue until he gets back. But being a part of... Oh, okay. All right. Awesome. So good. You'll get to hear it, and I won't have to repeat it. But being a part of Black Ops military projects myself, forcefully, unknowingly, and unwillingly, mind you, which is something that Andrew also says, oh, well, my dad put me in this project as a child, and, but then he talks about, his friend that, lost his foot and his ankle because something wasn't done right. Yet he talks about these military higher-ups, Black Ops projects people that are forcefully putting children into these projects as such a good, really nice guy. I mean, what a bunch of sweethearts, They're going to take a bunch of kids and, cut off their feet. And, oh, by the way, it doesn't end there because along with, training people for these projects and programming them involves torture. But he conveniently leaves that out and talks about, oh, what great people they are. So, part of what they train in these projects, I mean, besides sex slaves and besides murderers and this and that, is they train, they program you. They're called recorders, is what they're called. So basically, you get programmed with a story, and that's it. And it never varies. And you would think that if a story is truthful, Andrew, I've listened to some of your interviews, and you are different every time, and not different like you're contradicting yourself, but each time you recall these experiences or your experience, you're remembering something different. And it shows up as honest in each of these things. And, I even know when I talk about my own experience, like last week, we talked about my health experiences. And, sometimes I forget a couple things. Next time, tomorrow, I mean, even when I'm talking with my friends, I'm like, oh, yeah, I had a colonoscopy too. You either forget those things, and it's not as rigid. And it seems like when you ask him questions, it totally gets him off track, and he has to get back to the program. So involved with that group of people are others who were trying to come on my show even further, and they wanted to talk about a clone army that's on Mars, and hey, everybody, we have to fear this because, that's why they're really training us into super soldier assassins. So we can go to Mars and protect you little people here. And, so to me, it does not pass my BS meter based on my experience. And it appears that, there's always some fear programming going on, which has absolutely, okay, you know what? All right, let's say there is a clone army on Mars. Well, where are they? Guess what? We have a clone army right here in the UK where you are, in the US where I am, pretty much everywhere on this planet. Anybody who could be listening. So why do they want to take our focus off what is real, what is tangible, and how did these names get promoted into, literally out of thin air, just overnight?
Well, I think, those are all... Yeah, they're all very good questions, and I'm glad that you've used this word of programming, because programming is actually my background in terms of programming computers. So when you see the same repeated patterns, it does look like a program is an operation.
Yes.
And, you know, and I think I have actually seen that. And there are a couple of people that do seem to have had their story downloaded to their brain.
Yes, they do.
It's really weird, and I would characterize this story as I would agree with your characterization of it, basically.
I'm kind of bummed that he won't come back on my show and allow me to ask all these questions because, you know, he was obviously uncomfortable with some of the ones that I asked the first time, and you know, he won't even speak to me now when I've brought these up in several different areas, and he made predictions on my show, some of which I shared with you. Oh yeah, me and Obama go way back, and I guarantee by the end of this year, you know, UFO disclosure, and oh, by the way, I'm going to be the next president, and you know, and it's funny to me, he'll say these, you know, he did say that a lot for a couple years, but then I heard him on another show that was actually on my network, and so they asked him about those predictions. He said he never said such a thing, and completely denying on my show, even though obviously it's there. The archives are always there. I'm not like those people that go and delete ones I don't like. It's there. It's also there on YouTube with I don't know how many tens of thousands of views. So, I mean, something's not right here in this whole.
That's right, and I think
the community.
Right, and I've encountered that sort of thing a lot. And you know, the thing is, when he speaks, it's like he believes his own story. It's not like he's trying to phrase things in a way to cover his own back. So has he been reprogrammed? You know, so that he actually believes that he is telling the truth when actually he's not, and clearly he's not. He can prove that he's not. And, you know, going back to this experience I had with Alfred Weber, who's promoted Basiago, I would ask myself the same question, you know, is Weber being programmed? Because what I experienced, or rather not experienced personally, but what I documented, was that he did this interview with John Hudson and Judy Wood, which was about 9/11, and he was going on about, he actually said, he agreed that this weaponry, which was used to destroy the World Trade Center, you know, had principles of operation which were very similar to what John Hudson was doing, kind of scaled up. And he actually said this in the interview, and it was on his website, right? So we had that as a record. Then, about 3 months after this, there's parallels here to what we've been saying about Andrew Basiago. He did this other interview. He did this other interview with a lady called Lorraine Murray, who claimed, well, she did actually work for Lawrence Livermore Laboratories, but apparently not in the role that she claimed she worked in. And they were doing an interview about 9/11 and what happened to the World Trade Center. And again, I've got a recording of this interview, and he did this. He did 3 hours on this topic, and he said to Lorraine Murray, "So tell me, Lorraine, what made you conclude that the World Trade Center was destroyed using HARP?" And she says, well, it was really Judy Wood's web pages, which, or evidence, which convinced me of this. And then Alfred Weber stops her and says, "Now, without mentioning Judy Wood, please tell me, in your own words, why HARP destroyed the World Trade Center." And what did Lorraine do? She carries on, and she doesn't mention Judy Wood. She doesn't say, "Alfred, why would I not want to mention Judy Wood? You know, why? Because she's done all the research. Why are you asking me not to mention her?" You know, it's a very peculiar sort of thing to ask another guest not to mention somebody when they've already stated that the conclusion is based on that person's research. It would be like you, for example, saying to me, "Well, Andrew, what do you think about the human race being spread through the universe?" without mentioning Wilbert Smith.
Yeah. Oh, no. You can come on my show, but don't talk about Wilbur.
Right. And so basically, I put that into an article about that event because it was fitting into this pattern. I was essentially documenting, really, as I saw it, this idea that people were being given specific tasks, specific pieces of misdirection to, get involved with. That was the pattern that I was seeing emerging, and it was basically me, in my role of like a debugger. I was looking at the evidence I had, seeing where things were going wrong, and then working out what was the cause of those errors. And that's all in this book that I've written called 9/11 Finding the Truth.
Okay. So 9/11 Finding the Truth is the name of your book.
Yeah, it's a free ebook. You can get it as a paperback if you want, but there's a free Kindle version on my website, free iPad version, and there's somebody. I was absolutely, chuffed a bit, so I was really pleased because somebody volunteered to do a reading of the whole book, and so they've made it into an audio book for me. I actually did it with a computer voice, one of these computer voice readers, which was all right, but it was a bit. They said, no, I don't really like that, so I'm going to read the whole thing for you, Andrew. And they did it for me and didn't ask me for any money or anything.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. It's like, it's like 300, 400 pages nearly. And they've read the whole thing out.
Andrew, I'm looking, I said that's a lot of reading, but I'm looking at your website and I want to make sure everyone can find it because I was looking for it earlier and I couldn't find it. So how can we get a copy of it?
Yeah. Checktheevidence.com. You can put in just checktheevidence.com, or if you put in my name, Andrew Johnson, and 9/11, it should hopefully come up. But I know that Google is giving people selective search results now.
Yeah.
Try Googling Andrew Johnson 9/11 and tell me what comes up, because I know that...
Okay, let's try that. Andrew Johnson 9/11. See what we got. Yeah, because on your website, I looked at, one time I saw a link, I think it said something about stores or videos, and it didn't come up straight for me, and I did not see a book anywhere. So let's see if we can find, okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 links down for Googling Andrew Johnson 9/11. I get checktheevidence.com. And it says 9/11 Finding the Truth, free download ebook.
Oh.
Okay, here we go. I found it. Let me post that link in the text chat here over at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, and make sure everyone else gets to find it now.
So what you'll find there is I started writing articles to kind of get this all documented so that people could actually see the pattern that I was seeing. And I've got copies of emails that people have sent to me, and links to copies of radio interviews, so that you can actually hear people saying what I said they said, and I've highlighted certain bits like what Alfred Weber said, because basically he was agreeing that the Hudson effect was important to what happened on 9/11. Then 3 months later he was saying that HAARP did it, and then I get this email from him saying he's going to sue me. What are you going to sue me for, Alfred? But all I've put on my website is what you actually said. And I basically said, I've just said this is suspicious. That's basically all that I've said. I said this is what Alfred Weber has said, and it's suspicious as far as I'm concerned. I haven't accused him of anything. So
okay, so this is making sense why people are so up in arms about your work. And I have to say, okay, I have not gone through your entire website, but everything that I have seen, or whatever videos and stuff I've watched, I've never really seen you take a position like, oh, well, this is exactly what happened. I really hear you more asking questions and getting people to think, and, well, this doesn't really add up. So you're not portraying yourself as an authority. You're putting evidence there and asking questions. And, it's funny, in my experience, people that are like, oh, my God, I'm going to sue you for putting up truth about me are, well, they're kind of part of the club. And, Andrew being a lawyer and all of this is just, I don't know, it's fishy, and I just want to say again, I have personal experience in Black Ops projects, and I'll tell you what, I do not have any kind loving thoughts about any of these gentlemen in authority positions raping and torturing children and, putting them in jump rooms, allegedly, or sending them to other planets or anything. That's not right. I mean, if all of this stuff was on the up and up, you wouldn't have to force people to do it, drug them, torture them, and, program them against their will. You would willingly volunteer to do these things, no?
Right, right. I mean, was this sort of Montauk project that you heard about, got involved with, or?
I was actually in Stargate.
Operation Stargate.
Yeah. Oh, so you're familiar with that.
Well, I've heard. The one that I'm familiar with is the Operation Stargate that I'd heard of was the remote viewing program. But
yeah, the one that allegedly ended, in the 80s, and that's not true. And maybe, okay, maybe people caught on to it, and then they changed the name to something else. But I'll tell you, it did not end. It's still going on, and, I've read the Wikipedia version, and, there was only 16 people, and it only went from this year to that year, and that's not true. It's not even, like COINTELPRO supposedly ended in the 50s, right? Or 60s, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
So, of course, once again, they're going to put the information that they want us to believe out there, and when there's people like you, Andrew, questioning it or checking it or, exposing this stuff, of course they get really mad, like a bunch of, wasps. Oh, we got to get him. And, and I have been a victim of slander and I don't want to say I'm a victim. I'm not a victim, but I have been on the receiving end of that. And, there's good reason. It's because they have to keep it their game. And those who are outside of that box, well, slander them, destroy their reputation, slap false charges on them, imprison them, or disappear them entirely. So, yeah, and the whole thing is, once again, if what they were saying was 100% true, come on, why would they go after a little girl like me, who hardly has any listeners, and slap me, facing 56 years and, create this big hoopla, but not them, these big guys that, reach out to all these people and supposedly have all these secrets about the president and all these meetings, and come on. So it stinks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I sometimes wonder why, I got various bits of traffic to my website when it's just, I just describe myself as a guy with a website and a mouth,
Exactly. Andrew, Ahmad, the producer of the show, he has a question for you.
Okay.
Howdy. You speak of this Hutchison guy. Is he the same guy who done anti-gravity experiments?
Yes, essentially. I mean, that wasn't his original goal, but that's what he ended up producing. He ended up producing an anti-gravity effect.
But none of these experiments have ever been able to be reproduced, right?
If you read Wikipedia, but he reproduces it regularly. In fact, if you read my book 9/11 Finding the Truth, he was actually challenged by a 9/11 researcher called Ace Baker to reproduce the Hutchison effect or the levitation. And they agreed that John would levitate a wrench on demand, and the bet was $100,000. And against our advice, John accepted the bet, and guess what? On November the 1st, 2008, he levitated a wrench. But the person that had made the bet didn't show up for the demonstration, funnily enough.
Well, I'm going to read your book. That's for sure.
Definitely.
And he's also been doing it for TV appearances since. Again, if you read the Wikipedia page, it will say, he's never reproduced this. This thing's never been reproduced. And yet you can see that John Hutchison has 500 pounds of metal samples, which he's given out to various people, Dennis Kucinich being one of them, which end up as the result of some of his experiments. That not all these samples have necessarily been levitated, but the effects on the metal, which he calls jellification, are still, you can see them in the samples. And guess what? If you look at Dr. Judy Wood's research, you'll see in the evidence from 9/11, you'll see the effects of levitation, you'll see jellification, you'll see ongoing effects which continued to happen after the events of 9/11, which is exactly what happened in John Hutchison's experiment. You'll see weird fires and so forth. You'll see several other phenomena that John Hutchison has been reproducing since about 1983, are all present in the evidence that Dr. Judy Wood catalogued from the World Trade Center destruction. And guess what? When that was first said in public, and I was with Dr. Walton when we said that in January 2008. Within 16 hours, a character assassination campaign started against John Hutchison, and that's all documented in my book as well.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. It just, the name was hitting me wrong is all, and
right.
I'll have to do more research on it. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
Have you ever heard of the Kesh Foundation?
Yes, I have. Yes, this is something that's cropped up in the last sort of year, I think, and I listened to an interview with, I can't remember the chap's first name, Takeshi, I can't remember his first name. He's an Iranian, interestingly enough, and he claims to have invented this type of plasma reactor, I believe, which will give free energy to the world. And he claims to have invented a 5 kilowatt device, which is for sale. And actually, when you go to the website, you'll find that it's actually not for sale. It is, you can reserve one, but it's not actually for sale yet. I'm still waiting to see some evidence that the stories that he's telling are true. He could be true, but I'm currently at this point. My own personal jury is still out on this particular one.
Thank you. Personally, it is for me too. I mean, when he said he was going to announce it all to the world, and then he turned around and announced that Iran had some kind of special weapon, and if we tried to destroy him, they could destroy us. I don't know if you've heard that or not recently.
I haven't heard him say that, but this is very similar to what John Searle said about his technology, and this was a couple of years ago. But all I can say to Mr. Keshi is the advanced energy and anti-gravity technology, you don't need to worry about it falling into the hands of terrorists, because it already is in the hands of terrorists, and they used it to destroy the World Trade Center. And that is, to me, that is knowledge. That is not belief. And that, as I say, that knowledge is what's come from Dr. Judy Wood's research primarily, and John Hutchison too, of course. And it's that which is very, very dangerous for people to have knowledge rather than belief.
Mm. Excellent point. I'm glad you brought that up, Ahmad, because it's just, it goes along with the program. Oh, we're going to fear Iran, like we're supposed to fear Iraq and fear all these other people. Well, we're the ones with all the weapons. So I agree with exactly what you said, Andrew. The terrorists already have them, and most of them are occupying the White House.
Well, I think, that's it, but I think it's a transnational group. I mean, there's some very interesting... Definitely. Yeah, I don't know whether you've come across this idea. I think it's in a film series called Ring of Power. I've not actually watched, I should watch that whole thing through, but I think it's about 6 hours long or something, so I haven't sort of sat down and watched the whole thing. But basically, I understand that in that, what is put forward is that there are 3 centres of power on planet Earth currently. And the Vatican is the head of the religious power, London is the head of the financial power, and Washington is the head of military power on planet Earth, for the whole planet, basically. And if you look at all the research, I think that to me seems to explain some of it, why all of the militaristic thinking and so on seems to come, out of Washington. And a lot of the religious kind of initiatives come out of Rome.
Yeah.
And a lot of the finance, well, I suppose there is Wall Street, New York and stuff, but it seems to be centered around London.
And I'm glad that you brought that up as well, because with the whole UFO disclosure and alien thing and, United States, of course, predominantly denying it. Well, I mean, didn't even the Pope at the Vatican say, we have to embrace or love our alien brothers and sisters? I mean, they've technically already admitted it.
Well, technically you could argue that. I mean, one of the people that Stephen Greer brought to my attention with this disclosure project that I mentioned was a chap who's died in the last few years. And it was Balducci, Father Balducci.
Oh.
And he worked for the Vatican, and he was making those sorts of noises, I think, that you were alluding to, that, the aliens, could be our brothers, and we may be able to teach them about Jesus if they came here, or if they came here, something like that.
Yeah.
And it would, I mean, it wasn't quite, I put it in quite a simplistic way. I think he was quite an intelligent academic fellow, and he was making sort of various well-argued philosophical points. But it is quite interesting, looking into that and what the Vatican knows, because they say that the Vatican Library, obviously, they have a lot of secret information in there, and again, that has to remain a belief rather than knowledge. But again, if you listen to some of the people that have been there to look up stuff about religious records and archives and so on, it does appear there's a lot more in the Vatican than they would want to let us let on.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, do you have any more questions for Andrew?
Not right at the moment. That one just kind of stuck in my crawl, if you know what I mean, about Hutchison, because I heard so much about him, is all. And I do believe 9/11 was a psyop of some kind, and we really, everybody knows it. I mean, everybody that knows anything about it realizes this, but we never talk about the victims of it. That's what really bothers me about it. Mostly.
Well, there's even questions there, and I don't know if this is the place to bring it up, but I mean, we might as well, since we're kind of, debunking official stories here. Once again, not telling you exactly what happened. I don't claim to know, and I don't think you're claiming to know exactly what happened either, Andrew. But as far as the victims, at least here in the United States, there's a website, the Social Security Death Index, where, most of us have birth certificates, and then you also get a certificate when you die. And I've done this myself. I've typed in the names of everyone in my life that I know who has died, whether it was last week or 50 years ago. And all of their names are there. Yet when you search on the alleged 9/11 victims, their names aren't showing up. So do you have any insight into why that would be happening, Andrew?
Well, the victim's story of 9/11 is a complicated one. Obviously, going back to this idea that certain areas of research can offend people, for people to suggest that victims didn't die on 9/11, that can be, fairly offensive.
Yeah, I'm not saying nobody died. I'm just saying that, there's
yes, I am aware that there are anomalies with the stories of the victims, and that I don't think I've heard that if you put in all of the victims, none of them come up. But certainly, one of the things I would say is that if you put in the names of the victims from the plane crashes, my understanding is that more of those victim stories are more suspect than the ones of those that actually died in the destruction of the buildings themselves.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, people lost people didn't come home, so I don't want to, insinuate that nobody died. But the names that we hear the most often, I don't know, just something doesn't seem right. And then talk to people who actually worked in the buildings that weren't even allowed in the buildings that morning. They were sent home. So, where'd they go?
Right. I mean, I have, again, this is where it becomes rather complicated, because there are actually two levels of 9/11 cover-up. One is the official story. That's the first layer, the hijacker's fantasy. And then there is another story which has been put into the conspiracy community, or the alternative knowledge community, whatever you want to call it, primarily by people like Stephen E. Jones and David Ray Griffin, and they've kind of put into the mindset, or the alternative mindset, if you will, this idea of bombs in the building or thermite, and that doesn't explain the evidence either. And they try to say that the planes were remote controlled, but that doesn't actually explain what happened in terms physically to the buildings. And if you look at Dr. Judy Wood's study, which is purely concerned with what happened to the buildings, you can see that whatever crashed into those buildings was not a real plane. Just talk about that specifically. She mentions it in the early part of the book that she's done. But when you start to look into it, you could see that those planes could not have been real. And then that begins to tie in with with the victims' stories not being correct, because if the planes were not real, which they weren't, and I know that now, I know that they weren't real. Other people won't know it. They can keep it in a state of belief because they haven't looked at all the evidence that I've looked at. But I know that those planes were not real. Certainly the two planes that crashed into the World Trade Center, they weren't real planes.
If they were real, why did they confiscate all the videos? And why have we only shown little clips? And
hang on. Now you're going to believe. Now you're going to believe, because they didn't confiscate all of the videos. They may have confiscated some, and indeed there were signs up forbidding people from taking photographs. But as my understanding is, that was after the event. That was after the event had happened.
Yeah.
We have about 52 videos of the second plane that you can get your hands on.
Okay. And I mean,
so we do have these videos.
I'm just speaking from their perspective, as in the Department of them and the Pentagon, for example. I mean, it's 11 years later, and we're only allowed to see 4 frames from one angle.
Right. Certainly as regards to the Pentagon, I haven't seen any clear video of a plane hitting the Pentagon. Not one.
No.
With the World Trade Center, there are plenty of clear videos. So we do have a very complicated story.
Yeah.
Some of that is talked about in my book. Some of it has actually come about. We've had a bit more information this year due to the analysis of a fellow engineer friend called Richard D. Hall, who does a weekly television program in this country, or it goes out across Europe, actually. Mm-hmm. And what he did was quite remarkable, really, because he got these 52 World Trade Center videos that I mentioned, and he then mapped these videos into a 3D model, and found that actually these videos do tie up, because I'd felt for a number of years that what they'd done is they'd doctored a lot of the footage of these videos and used CGI to make these planes look like exactly what it was a missile or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Or even in, take Pennsylvania, for instance, and even the first responders, which of course they quit playing that report immediately, and thankfully other people had recorded it, but the first responders were like, whoa, where's the plane? I just see this big old hole in the ground, and
exactly.
I don't know. It doesn't add up. And once again, I'm not claiming to know what happened, but I know that the official stories that we are told are the conspiracy theory, and certainly could not be true based on physics and the evidence that is available.
Right, and I think there's again, going back to this knowledge versus belief point, what the conspiracy movement encourages, it encourages a mindset of, oh yes, this is very interesting, it's a bit of a mystery, but we'll never know the answer. What I can tell you is that I know how the World Trade Center was destroyed. I know enough to say what it wasn't categorically, and we also
let's hear it. We have about 7 minutes left, so I'd love to hear your final conclusion on what you have found through all the evidence that you've studied all these years.
Right. Well, again, this is primarily down to the evidence catalogue by Dr. Judy Wood, but what actually was used was some type of energy weapon that was used to destroy the World Trade Center. And we now know that this weapon operates on a principle of what's called field interference. And this is where you mix together different types of energy. You mix together electrostatic energy, magnetic fields, possibly, or indeed probably, microwave energy and radio frequency energy. And guess what? That's exactly what John Hutchison's been doing since 1983. That's partly how we know that's what was involved. The process, this operation of this weapon was it was acting for a period, I think, of about 2 hours to kind of dissolve World Trade Center Towers 1 and 2 from the inside, and that was why these people were jumping out, because what they were experiencing was the effects of being in the way of this energy field, which was being used to dissolve the buildings while they were still in there, and that's why they were jumping out. It wasn't because the buildings were burning down. There appears to have been some fire, but some of these fire effects were perhaps not what you call normal, conventional hot fires. So the buildings were dissolved and then they turned to dust. And this is actually what happened.
Yes.
You can see this in the videos.
Yes.
Dr. Judy Wood points out in her book and in her presentations the seismic signature when the buildings didn't hit the ground, I should say, was 2.3. And the shaking of the ground lasted for only 8 seconds. So if the building had come down in stages or whatever, the shaking would have lasted longer. And you can compare this with quarry blasts, which happened on the same day, because he's got all those records. We also know, for example, that Hurricane Erin was there. It was 500 miles.
Yes. Nobody talks about that.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the people that talk about John Hutchison's research, people that talk about UFO research, they won't talk about Judy Wood's research. And this is what's documented in my book. And another example that comes to mind is Richard Dolan. Richard Dolan was one of the first UFO researchers to write about 9/11. Will he talk about Hurricane Erin on 9/11? No, he won't. Even though I personally put the information in his hand, he will not talk about it.
Well, I personally am not familiar with Dr. Judy Wood's work, so you're really intriguing me. I want to go check it out now. And, you brought up another good point, all these buildings that just turned to dust, which, we kind of saw a little bit on what they allowed us to see on TV, yet miraculously, they were still able to find completely unscathed passports.
Well, again, according to the story, that might be a story, but even more amazing than that is the recent, I don't know if you saw it, this was a very interesting story which was put on the news at the anniversary, and they called it the 9/11 surfer. I don't know if you heard this story at all?
No, I'm not. I don't.
This guy, what happened to him? He was on MSNBC. This was, I think, was on the 11th of September or the 10th or the 9th this year. Just over about 6 weeks ago, and he tells this story. I think he was on the 26th floor. He was working for the Port Authority. This first event had happened. This first impact had happened, and I think he was in the tower that he went. He was in Tower 1, so his building went down second. He felt the other building go down, but he didn't know what happened. He was right inside the building and didn't see it. And he started off to go down the stairs. He'd been in the building for 40 minutes, and basically the building came apart around him. And he first thing he remembered was being on the 26th floor. The next, he was in a pile of rubble. So it's like that pile of rubble was about 3 stories high, I think, or probably less than that, probably 1 story high. So he'd fallen somehow 20 stories with the building being destroyed around him, and he survived. And he survived in Stairwell B, which is where 11 other people survived. And there's a whole documentary about that you can watch. It's called The Miracle of Stairwell B. So underneath these 100 stories of building that had supposedly fallen down or collapsed, and they didn't collapse, they turned to dust, a group of about 10 people survived. And they had their radios worked as well. These were firefighters that had gone in to rescue people. And they were saying, where are saying we need help, we can't get out. Some debris had fallen on top of them, and the people outside, away from the building, said, "Where are you? Stairwell B, it's Tower 1." And they're saying, "Where? Stairwell B, it's Tower 1." And they didn't believe them. They didn't believe that they could have survived. Yet they, within 10 seconds, 100 stories of building had come down on top of them, and they were looking up at daylight. Those buildings were gone.
Amazing. And how many buildings did we lose that day? That's interesting.
7 buildings.
Exactly. Another thing that, you mentioned that on the streets, whatever city you are, anywhere in the world, and they look at you like you're crazy. So if a plane allegedly hit 2 buildings, it doesn't make sense that we lost 7 buildings that day, and the fact that we're not being told about it. But Andrew, unfortunately, we only have about 3 minutes left in today's show. So I'd like for you to take it out from here. What are the most important, interesting facts that you would like us to know?
Well, I think, just to tie in with what I've just been saying, it's important for people to realise that as well as 9/11 being a psychological operation to, create the war on terror and all that's gone with that, and give the people in charge carte blanche to mess with our lives, and be groped at airports and all that stuff, that is, of course, a complete lie. Then, on top of that, we've got the energy cover-up. And if you look into Dr. Judy Wood's research and also the book that I have written, you will see that figures who were involved in the energy cover-up, the cover-up of an energy